The 1970s began with smoke, steel, and pure power. Every major automaker was caught in an arms race for supremacy, but what came next would blur the line between road car and racing machine. Number 15, 1970 AMC Rebel machine. The decade opened with a surprise, not from Detroit's Big Three, but from the underdog, American Motors Corporation. The AMC Rebel machine wasn't just bold, it was defiant. Painted in red, white, and blue, it was the car that screamed patriotism and performance in equal measure. Under the hood sat a 390 cubic inch V8, officially rated at 340 horsepower, but dyno tests whispered of more. This wasn't a car meant to blend in. It came with a factory tachometer, a functional hood scoop, and quarter-mile times in the low 14 seconds. Yet what made it rare wasn't just its audacity, it was its fate. Only around 2,326 units were ever built. After 1970, AMC's muscle era faded fast, leaving the Rebel machine as a symbol of rebellion in a world about to go quiet. Number 14, 1970 Mercury Cyclone spoiler. While Ford dominated NASCAR with its Torino Talladega, Mercury had its own secret weapon, the Cyclone spoiler. Built to conquer the oval tracks, it came with a wind-sculpted body and Mercury's version of the 429 Cobra jet engine. Underneath that long hood roared 370 horsepower, but the car's soul was pure competition. With its bullet nose and aerodynamic design, the Cyclone spoiler looked more like a missile than a muscle car. Less than 350 were ever made, and fewer than 100 are known to survive today. Most were raced, wrecked, or simply disappeared. Today, when one surfaces, it's treated like buried treasure. A reminder that Mercury once played in the big leagues of muscle. Number 13, 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1. If you think Buick was all about luxury and comfort, think again. In 1970, Buick shocked the world with a car that could humble a Hemi, the GSX Stage 1. This wasn't just a muscle car. It was a weapon wearing a tuxedo. Powered by a 455 cubic inch V8, officially rated at 360 horsepower, the GSX's real output was rumored to exceed 420 horsepower and 510 pound-feet of torque. With only 678 GSX Stage 1s built, this was a rare beast even in its own time. And in an era when most muscle cars were stripped down and loud, the GSX came loaded. Bucket seats, rally gauges, posh interiors, and that signature Saturn yellow or Apollo white paint. The GSX wasn't just about straight-line speed, it was about Buick's statement to the world. We can do power, and we can do it with class. Number 12, 1970 Plymouth Superbird 446 barrel. If ever there was a car that looked like it could fly, it was the Superbird. That nose cone, that sky-high rear wing, that unmistakable roar. The 1970 Plymouth Superbird was born for one thing: NASCAR domination. Powered by either the 426 Hemi or the 446 barrel, this machine was Plymouth's way of saying, "We're done playing nice." The 6-barrel variant produced 390 horsepower, capable of touching 60 miles per hour in under 5.5 seconds. But here's the catch. NASCAR changed the rules, banning cars with extreme aero designs. So only 1,920 Superbirds were ever built, and many dealers couldn't even sell them. Some sat for years, unwanted, until collectors realized they were staring at history. Today, the Superbird stands as one of the most recognizable and rarest symbols of 1970s muscle car insanity. Number 11, 1971 Pontiac GTO Judge. By 1971, the muscle car world was changing fast. Emissions laws, insurance hikes, and the oil crisis loomed. But Pontiac wasn't ready to back down. They gave one last salute to raw power with the 1971 GTO Judge. Only 374 Judges were ever produced that year, and just 17 of those came with the 455 HO engine and a manual transmission. That engine produced 335 horsepower, but its torque, over 480 pound-feet, told the real story. It could shred tires and silence critics with ease. It was the end of an era, the final year for the Judge package. And when the gavel finally fell, Pontiac's muscle legend left the stage forever. Number 10. 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 LS6. Now we enter the territory of legends. The 1970 Chevelle SS 454 LS6 wasn't just fast, it was ferocious. This was the car that redefined brute force on American streets. Its 454 cubic inch V8 produced an advertised 450 horsepower, though most insiders claimed it was well over 500. The LS6 could launch from 0 to 60 in 5.4 seconds and conquer the quarter mile in just over 13 seconds on street tires. But here's what made it special. Only about 4,475 units were ever built, and fewer than 100 remain in mint condition today. It was Chevrolet's masterpiece of muscle, raw, unapologetic, and brutally fast. The LS6 Chevelle is a time capsule from the moment when horsepower ruled without mercy. Number 9. 1970 Ford Torino King Cobra. Sometimes the best cars never make it to production. The 1970 Ford Torino King Cobra is one of those legendary what-ifs. Designed to dominate NASCAR, it featured an experimental aerodynamic nose and hidden headlights, meant to rival Dodge's Daytona and Plymouth's Superbird. Under the hood sat a Boss 429 engine, good for well over 370 horsepower. But fate had other plans. NASCAR changed its homologation rules, and Ford pulled the plug. Only 3 King Cobras were ever built. One red, one white, one yellow. Each one still exists today, tucked away in private collections, rarely seen by the public. The King Cobra wasn't a failure. It was a glimpse of what Ford could have unleashed if the rulebook hadn't changed. Number 8. 1971 Dodge Charger Super B 446 pack. In 1971, Dodge gave one last muscle-bound roar before the storm. The Charger Super B 446 pack was the final gasp of Mopar's glory. Under its bulging hood sat a 440 cubic inch V8 with triple 2-barrel carburetors, the iconic 6-pack setup, delivering 385 horsepower and massive torque. This wasn't just a rebadged Charger. It was purpose-built for performance, stripped down for speed. Only 22 Super B 446 packs with 4-speed manuals were ever made that year, making it one of the rarest Mopars in existence. It was the end of an era, the last true B before the hive went silent. But while Dodge was saying its goodbyes, across the country, other manufacturers were still whispering defiance. In quiet factories and forgotten garages, the last flames of American muscle were still burning. What came next were machines so rare, most people never even knew they existed. Number 7. 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda Convertible. If there's one car that defines the word unobtainable, this is it. The 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda Convertible isn't just rare, it's practically mythical. In 1971, Plymouth built only 11 Hemi Cuda convertibles, and just 2 were equipped with 4-speed manual transmissions. That's it, 11. Under its hood lived the legendary 426 Hemi Fiv 8, officially rated at 425 horsepower. But in truth, it churned out closer to 475. With its shaker hood, pistol grip shifter, and aggressive stance, the Hemi Cuda was Detroit's final declaration of defiance before regulations silenced the roar. Decades later, this car would rewrite record books, with auction prices exceeding $3.5 million. Owning one isn't just a privilege, it's owning the last breath of the muscle car golden age. Number 6. 1972 Oldsmobile 442 W30. As the early 70s turned dark for performance, Oldsmobile fought to keep the dream alive. The 1972 442 W30 was one of the last true high-performance warriors of its time. Fitted with a 455 cubic inch V8 and the legendary W30 performance package, it made 300 horsepower. Impressive considering the era's tightening emissions rules. But the real story was torque. 500 pound-feet that hit like a hammer. Fewer than 300 W30s were built that year, most of them automatics. A handful of 4-speed cars slipped through, and today, they stand as symbols of Oldsmobile's forgotten performance legacy. While other brands were watering down their muscle cars, Oldsmobile refused to bow. The 442 W30 went out swinging. Number 5. 1970 AMC AMX 390 Go package. Back to the rebel brand, AMC. Before the company was consumed by financial struggles, it gave us one final masterpiece, the AMX 390 Go package. It was small, light, and lethal. Beneath the hood sat a 390 cubic inch V8, officially rated at 325 horsepower, capable of launching this compact beast to 60 miles per hour in 5.7 seconds. Only around 2,100 were built in 1970, and even fewer with the Go package, which included upgraded suspension, heavy-duty cooling, and power front discs. The AMX wasn't just AMC's sports car. It was their statement that even the underdog could bite back. And in collector circles today, a clean Go package AMX is a six-figure prize. Number 4. 1971 Baldwin Motion Phase 3 GT Corvette. In the shadows of mainstream muscle, a different kind of legend was being built. One not born in a factory, but in a New York speed shop. The Baldwin Motion Phase 3 GT Corvette was the brainchild of Joel Rosen and Baldwin Chevrolet, who decided that stock power just wasn't enough. They took Corvettes straight off the line, tuned them to the edge, and turned them into monsters. The Phase 3 GT packed a 454 cubic inch LS6 or custom-tuned L88 V8, producing anywhere from 500 to 600 horsepower, numbers that bordered on insanity for a street car. Top speed? A verified 180 miles per hour. Only 10 Phase 3 GTS were ever built, each one hand-modified, each one unique. It was more than a Corvette. It was a street-legal race car that challenged the government's definition of sanity. Even today, spotting one is like finding a ghost from America's wildest horsepower dreams. Number 3. 1970 Pontiac Trans Am Ram Air 4. When Pontiac launched the Trans Am, it wasn't meant for everyone. It was built for believers. And the 1970 Trans Am Ram Air 4 was the purest version of that faith. The Ram Air 4 engine, a 400 cubic inch V8 with high-flow heads and an aluminum intake, officially made 345 horsepower, though insiders whispered of over 400. It revved higher, pulled harder, and sounded meaner than almost anything on the road. Production? Just 88 units. That's right, fewer than 90 examples of this masterpiece ever left the factory. The Trans Am Ram Air 4 wasn't about showing off. It was about one thing: speed, precision, and rebellion wrapped in white paint and blue stripes. Today, it's considered one of the finest driver's muscle cars ever built, a perfect balance of power and control before the decade turned dark. Number 2. 1970 Dodge Challenger RT 426 Hemi convertible. While the Plymouth Hemi Cuda stole the headlines, its cousin, the 1970 Dodge Challenger RT Hemi convertible, became even rarer. In that single model year, only 9 Hemi-powered Challenger convertibles were built. Each one carried the same 426 cubic inch Hemi Fif 8, paired with either a Torque-a-Flight automatic or a pistol-grip 4-speed manual. Rated at 425 horsepower, this engine was capable of launching the Challenger past 100 miles per hour before you could blink. But what made it legendary wasn't just performance. It was exclusivity. A car so rare, most collectors will never even see one in person. One sold at auction for over $2 million, cementing its place among the most valuable muscle cars ever made. The Challenger RT Hemi convertible was Dodge's boldest statement and its rarest creation. Think you know Chevrolet? Think again. Beyond the Camaros and Corvettes lie stories of innovation, ambition, and sometimes missteps. Let's uncover the forgotten chapters of Chevy's history. 1. 1958 Chevy Bel Air. It was supposed to be the start of something bold, Chevy's answer to the space age. The 1958 Bel Air came with towering fins, a new X-frame, and more chrome than a Vegas casino. But the timing couldn't have been worse. A recession hit, gas prices crept up, and buyers, They weren't impressed with the weight or the weird proportions. The 58 was a one-year wonder. By 1959, the design was completely overhauled, making this Bel Air the most quickly forgotten full-size Chevy of the era. Yet today, that same squareback styling has a cult following, especially among resto mod fans. 2. 1960 Chevy Corvair. It looked like nothing else on the road. Rear engine, air-cooled, independent suspension. The Corvair was GM's wildest gamble in 1960. But then came Ralph Nader. His book, Unsafe at Any Speed, blamed the Corvair's handling for fatal crashes, labeling it a death trap. Sales tanked, lawsuits followed, and Chevy killed it in 1969, just as the second-gen Corvair got genuinely good. The irony? Years later, the government's own safety investigation cleared the Corvair. But by then, the damage was done. A bold experiment, buried by bad press. 3. 1975 Corvette. It still looked like a rocket ship, but under the hood, the 1975 Corvette was a shell of its former self. Gone was the fire-breathing LT1. In its place, a smog-choked 165 horsepower 350. Yes, just 165 horses in America's sports car. Worse, the 454 big block was axed after 74, making this the first Vetta to feel slower than it looked. GM tried to distract buyers with a new catalytic converter and steel bumpers, but gearheads saw the truth. The 1975 model marked the end of an era and the start of the Corvette's long climb back to power. 4. 2003 Chevy SS Concept. Built on a Silverado chassis, shaped like a Chevelle, and powered by a Corvette Z06 LS6 V8. The 2003 Chevy SS Concept was a monster. Rear drive, 20-inch wheels, 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds. It was meant to resurrect Chevy's performance image, a Camaro alternative with utility. But GM got cold feet. The concept never made it past the show floor. And instead of raw muscle, Chevy chased front-wheel drive sedans and hybrids. The SS name would return years later, but never with the punch of this forgotten beast. 5. 1994 to 1996 Impala SS. It looked like your dad's Caprice. But under the hood, the 94 Impala SS packed a Corvette-derived LT1 V8 with 260 horsepower. It rode on police suspension, had blackout trim, and could roast its rear tires like no other full-size sedan. It was quiet, dark, dangerous, a muscle car in a business suit. But despite its cult appeal, the Impala SS was killed after just 3 years. Rumors blamed GM's Arlington plant being converted to SUV production. Whatever the reason, it vanished just as it was becoming a legend. Today, good examples are skyrocketing in value, especially the sinister black-on-black models. 6. 2011 to 2017 Chevy Caprice PPV. Imported from Australia, sold only to police. The Chevy Caprice PPV was a Holden Commodore under the skin, a rear-drive, V8-powered beast with space for a shotgun rack and a laptop. Civilians weren't supposed to get one, but some found their way onto the used market. With 355 horsepower and better handling than any Crown Vic, the PPV was the ultimate highway hunter. But GM never marketed it to the public, and when Holden shut down, the Caprice died with it. A car that could have been the next Impala SS, lost to bureaucratic decisions and bad timing. 7. 2004 Chevy Malibu Max SS. It was weird. No one knew what to make of it. Part wagon, part hatchback, part performance sleeper. The Malibu Max SS came with a 3.9-liter V6, sport suspension, and flared bodywork. It even had rear-seat DVD players, before SUVs made it cool. But the styling, polarizing, the performance, middling. It sold in tiny numbers, confused everyone, and vanished after 2 years. Yet today, some call it the weirdest SS-badged Chevy ever made. Maybe it was ahead of its time, or maybe it was just strange. 8. 1980 Chevy Monza Mirage. In the late 70s, racing fans wanted cheap thrills. Chevy delivered the Monza, small, rear drive, and with a V8 option. But the Mirage? It took things a step further. Fender flares, striping, front and rear spoilers. It looked like a baby Trans Am, but lighter and just as wild on back roads. Built in limited numbers, most were dealer kits, not factory-made. Today, they're unicorns. A forgotten blip in Chevy's performance history that hardcore fans still hunt for. 9. 1990 Chevrolet Lumina Z34. Think front-wheel drive can't be fun? Think again. The Lumina Z34 came with a 210-horsepower twin-cam V6, sport suspension, and a Getrag 5-speed manual. 0 to 60 in 7 seconds flat. Not bad for a big 90s coupe. NASCAR even ran a version of it in stock car trim. But while the Z34 had potential, it was plagued by reliability issues and lukewarm styling. It quietly vanished by 1994, overshadowed by the rise of imports and the death of the big coupe market. Still, for a moment, it proved Chevy could make even a Lumina exciting. 10. 2003 to 2006 Chevy SSR. It had curves, chrome, and a retractable hardtop. But beneath the retro styling, the SSR struggled to find purpose. Was it a truck, a roadster, a novelty? Early models were underpowered, with a 5.3-liter V8 borrowed from SUVs. Only in its final year did it get serious, with the LS2 Corvette motor pushing 390 horsepower. Too little, too late. The SSR was too weird, too expensive, and too misunderstood. It ended in 2006, leaving behind confused buyers and unsold inventory. But today, it's gaining steam as a collectible oddball because nothing else ever looked like it. They promised the moon, raw horsepower, head-turning design, and a front-row seat to the American dream. But under that shimmering paint and tire smoke lay transmission failures, warped heads, busted electronics, and heartbreak by the mile. These were the 90s muscle cars that looked like legends, but punished the people who dared to own them. Let's revisit the decade's most seductive disasters. 11 gorgeous machines from the grunge era that roared like legends and crashed like curses. 1. 1990 Ford Mustang SVT Cobra R. Ford's special vehicle team had one goal in the early 90s: make Mustangs mean again. Enter the Cobra R, a track-spec machine with zero creature comforts, just a 5.0-liter Windsor V8, 225 horsepower, stiffer springs, massive sway bars, and 13-inch front rotors with 4-piston calipers. Oh, and no AC, no stereo, no back seat. It was terrifyingly fast for its day, tested at 0 to 60 in 5.7 seconds, the quarter mile in low 13 seconds. But it hated the street. Early buyers learned fast. The non-power steering setup made parking feel like wrestling a gorilla. The suspension would compress your spine on anything rougher than a racetrack. Add the limited-run nature, only 245 built, and every replacement part required prayer, patience, and occasionally an SVT contact. Cobra Rs weren't daily drivers. They were divine punishment for the ambitious. 2. 1993 Chevy Camaro Z28 LT1. This Camaro looked like it could punch through walls. It nearly could. GM dropped the Corvette's LT1 5.7-liter V8 into it. 275 horsepower, 325 pound-feet of torque, and paired it with the legendary T56 6-speed. Magazines said it brought the Camaro back from the dead, but this beast ran hot, literally. The reverse flow cooling system baffled even dealership techs. Head gaskets failed often, some within 20,000 miles. Aluminum heads warped. OptiSpark ignition modules, mounted just below the water pump, loved to fry in high humidity or if the water pump leaked, which it did. Drive it hard? Expect misfires, overheating, and eventually full-blown motor rebuilds. Today, clean Z28s are rare, not because they weren't loved, but because so many burned themselves out. 3. 1991 Dodge Stealth RT Twin Turbo. It had pop-up headlights, a wide stance, and a look that screamed exotic. But the Dodge Stealth RT Twin Turbo was actually Mitsubishi's GTO in disguise, and it came with everything: twin turbos, AWD, active exhaust, adjustable suspension, all-wheel steering, and a twin-cam V6 making 300 horsepower. It should have been perfect. But instead, it was a maintenance horror film. The complexity meant everything could go wrong. Transfer cases failed, rear steering motors locked, ECU caps leaked and fried boards, vacuum lines cracked, disabling entire systems. And when something broke, you couldn't take it to a Dodge tech. These were JDM bones. Most owners either became shade tree experts or gave up entirely. It was fast, flashy, and one error code away from a $3,000 headache. 4. 1995 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am W6. By 95, Pontiac needed something big. Enter the WS6 performance package, a wild aero kit, ram air hood, and a tuned 5.7-liter LT1 with 305 horsepower. It looked like a Batmobile for the street, and when it worked, it flew. 0 to 60 in 5.3 seconds. But inside, trouble brewed. The fuel delivery system was unreliable. The factory fuel pumps whined, cavitated, and failed, often stranding owners miles from anywhere. The LT1 had all the same weaknesses as the Camaro: overheating, ignition issues, warped heads. But with less dealer support and even more awkward body panels to remove for basic maintenance. And that WS6 hood? It was fiberglass. It warped if left in the sun too long. A sunburned muscle car? That's poetic pain. 5. 1994 Ford Mustang SVT Cobra. The SN95 Cobra was supposed to be the return of performance Mustangs: independent rear suspension, upgraded brakes, and a more refined 5.0-liter V8 with 240 horsepower. But Ford's first crack at IRS was literal. Owners discovered the subframe around the rear suspension could crack under hard cornering. Welds failed. Rear axles shifted. Entire differentials tore loose. Ford issued a TSB, then a quiet recall, but most owners were on their own. Even when it held together, it had poor weight distribution and brake fade after a few laps. You bought it to be a canyon carver. You ended up chasing cracks with a welder. 6. 1997 Shelby Series 1. This car was supposed to be Shelby's return to greatness. An in-house chassis, carbon body, Oldsmobile-sourced V8, and Corvette ZR1 underpinnings. It looked like nothing else on the road, and it moved, 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds. But Shelby built it like a kit car. Fit and finish were erratic. Window seals leaked, body panels misaligned. The engine bay cooked electronics. The interior plastics peeled. And the support? Non-existent. Worse, most weren't even delivered as real Shelbys. To get the advertised 450 horsepower supercharged version, owners had to ship them back for a second stage build. It was Shelby's dream, but everyone else's engineering nightmare. 7. 1992 GMC Cyclone Typhoon. You've heard it before. The Cyclone could beat a Ferrari to 60. It was true. Car and driver clocked it at 4.3 seconds to 60 miles per hour, but that came at a cost. The turbocharged 4.3-liter V6 strained under pressure. Head gasket failures were common. The water-to-air intercooler often heat-soaked during repeated runs. And the AWD system? Complex and expensive when anything failed. The Typhoon SUV variant added more weight and body flex. Owners learned to live with drivetrain clunks, leaking shocks, and limited parts availability. Fast? Absolutely. Reliable? As long as you didn't drive it. 8. 1996 Dodge Viper RT10. The original Viper was as subtle as a sledgehammer to the teeth. no ABS, no traction control, no roof, side pipes that could burn your legs, 8.0-liter V10, 400 horsepower, 465 pound-feet of torque. But for all its track charisma, it was a hazard to own. Throttle tip-in was touchy, rear-end snap was common. Crashes happened constantly. Insurance companies either charged triple or flat-out refused. And then came the heat. Vipers cooked their interiors, they cooked fuel lines, they even cooked fuse boxes. Garage fires weren't myths, they were frequent. It looked like an F-16. It was built like a howitzer, and it treated owners like crash test dummies. 1999 Dodge Durango RT. The Durango RT had a 5.9-liter Magnum 5.8, pushing 245 horsepower, rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, and performance shocks and sway bars. It was the charger of the cul-de-sac. But the brakes were criminally underpowered. The transmission slipped under towing. Leaf springs cracked. And the fuel economy? 12 miles per gallon on a good day. Drivers who pushed it found axle wrap, warped rotors, and a bizarre center of gravity that punished cornering. It looked ready for NASCAR. It was better suited to NASCAR parking lots. 1998 Chevrolet Monte Carlo Z34. GM wanted to give the Monte Carlo some teeth again. The Z34 had a double overhead camshaft, 3.4-liter V6, 215 horsepower, and an aggressive stance. But it was all bark, no bite. The 3.4-liter had fragile timing belts, failing intake gaskets, and oil leaks galore. The 4T60E transmission couldn't handle torque. At 70 miles per hour, torque converter shudder made it feel like the wheels were trying to leave the car. Beautiful on a poster, painful on a long drive. 1997 Plymouth Prowler. The Prowler looked like a concept sketch brought to life. Retro-futuristic with flared fenders and open wheels. It was a head-turner, but it had no muscle. Under the hood, a 3.5-liter V6, 214 horsepower, and a 4-speed automatic lifted from Chrysler sedans. 0 to 60 in 7 seconds, barely faster than a minivan. The aluminum chassis flexed, the front suspension squeaked, and replacement parts? Extinct. It cost Corvette money, but performed like a neon mirage. While GM and Ford battled for the spotlight, Dodge and Plymouth built monsters in the dark. A Dart with a big block heart, a truck that outran Corvettes, a Chrysler that could smoke an M5 in leather seats. They weren't just building cars, they were starting fires, and no one noticed the smoke. This is the story of 10 times Mopar changed the rules, and history didn't bother to take notes. 1. Dodge Dart GTS 440. In 1969, Dodge shoved a 440 cubic inch V8 into the small-bodied Dart. It was like mounting a grenade launcher on a bicycle. 375 horsepower on paper. Real output? Over 400. 0 to 60 in under 6 seconds. Quarter mile in the low 13s. It came with no AC, no power steering, just torque and violence. The Dart 440 wasn't advertised. It was a hush-hush deal between dealers and drag racers. Mopar didn't need marketing. They had street rep. It wasn't built for comfort. It was built to smoke Camaros. And it did. 2. Plymouth Belvedere Max Wedge. Before muscle cars had names, Mopar was already at war. In 1963, Plymouth built the Belvedere with the 426 Max Wedge, a Frankenstein of engineering, high-compression V8, dual carb setup, factory headers, 425 horsepower, grossly underrated. On slicks, it ran low 12s. It came with a trunk warning label, not intended for street use. This car didn't just show up at the drag strip, it dominated it. Forget GTO or Mustang. The Belvedere Max Wedge was already out here winning. 3. Chrysler 300 Hurst. Luxury and performance usually don't mix, but in 1970, Chrysler proved otherwise. The 300 Hurst was a 2-ton bullet with a fiberglass hood, gold accents, and a 440 TNT V8 pushing 375 horsepower. Only 501 were made. but each one looked like it had come straight from Daytona. Despite its size, the Hearst ran 15.7 in the quarter and had enough low-end torque to tow a battleship. It was fast, rare, and oddly elegant. A gentleman's street brawler. And just like that, it vanished. 4. Dodge Aspen RT Super Pack. 1978 was a desert for performance, but Mopar found water in the Dodge Aspen RT Super Pack. Yeah, it had stripes and louvers, but it wasn't just a sticker job. Underneath was a 360 V8, performance suspension, sway bars, and a 3.21 rear end. It could crack 16-second quarter miles in an era where most cars couldn't break 18. Car and Driver wrote that it had the heart of the old muscle machines. But no one was listening, because the body creaked and the emissions choked it. Still, in a dying muscle scene, the Aspen fought to keep the flame alive. 5. Plymouth Roadrunner 440+6. Everyone loves the Hemi. But real Mopar fans? They know the 446 barrel was where the street magic lived. 3 Holly 2 barrels, 390 horsepower, a face-melting 490 pound-feet of torque. Tested in period, it pulled a 13.5-second quarter and sounded like the end of the world. The 440+6 was cheaper, simpler, and meaner than the Hemi. It didn't rev high, it hit hard. But in the collector world, it never got the same love. It was the muscle car for people who cared about speed, not bragging rights. 6. 1978 Dodge Lil Red Express. It looked like a novelty. Bright red paint, wood paneling, vertical exhaust stacks. But under the hood, a 360 high-output police interceptor V8. No catalytic converters. It was the fastest American production vehicle from 0 to 100 miles per hour in 1978. Beat the Vet, beat the Trans Am, beat everything. Tested by Car and Driver at 14.7 seconds in the quarter, it was faster than 90% of the performance cars on the road. A muscle truck before anyone even coined the term. And everyone laughed until it smoked them. 7. Dodge Shelby GLHS. Shelby didn't just make Mustangs. In the 80s, he joined Dodge and built chaos out of compact cars. The 1986 Shelby GLHS looked like a commuter box, but it was a monster. 175 horsepower, under 2,200 pounds, 0 to 60 in 6.5. Magazine testers said it was more brutal than a Mustang GT. It outhandled, out-accelerated, and outsmarted everything in its class. And with Shelby's touch, it became legend in the underground scene. No one took it seriously, until it disappeared from the mirror. 8. Chrysler Cordoba 400. Luxury never sounded so mean. In 1979, Chrysler gave the Cordoba a 400 cubic inch V8 option. Not fast by today's numbers, but in the smog era, a hidden gem. It had torque, rear drive, and suspension tuning that let you actually push it through curves. Not bad for something with rich Corinthian leather. It wasn't marketed as a muscle car, but behind the opera windows and hood ornament was Mopar's stubborn refusal to slow down. 9. Chrysler 300C SRT8. When Chrysler brought back the 300C, they didn't just revive a name, they reignited a fire. The 2006 SRT8 packed a 6.1-liter Hemi with 425 horsepower and Brembo brakes. It did 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds and ran the quarter in 13 flat. It had GPS, leather, and enough torque to make an M5 nervous. It didn't shout. It whispered violence in a deep voice. Mopar had built a muscle car in a suit, and most people mistook it for a luxury sedan. 10. Dodge Challenger SRT Demon. This was it. 840 horsepower on race gas, drag radials, line lock, trans brake, 0 to 60 in 2.3 seconds, quarter mile in 9.65. It was so fast, NHRA banned it without a roll cage. The Demon didn't just bend the rules, it ignored them. You got a crate with tools, a narrow front wheel set, and one seat unless you paid $1 extra. It was the final form of the American muscle car, a factory drag car, a street-legal legend. And when it left, nothing came close. What happens when Ford stops playing by the rules? You don't just get muscle cars, you get machines that start riots. Ford's history is littered with moments where engineers said, "Screw it," grabbed a wrench, and built something so outrageous, it had to be real. These are the 10 times Ford didn't just bend the rules, they torched the playbook and made history. 1. 1966 Ford GT40. After Enzo Ferrari humiliated Henry Ford II by backing out of a deal, Ford didn't get even. He got faster. He ordered his engineers to crush Ferrari at Le Mans, no matter the cost. What they built was the GT40, a 7.0-liter V8 mid-engine monster with one purpose: annihilate Maranello. In 1966, the GT40 Mark II didn't just win, it swept the podium. 1, 2, 3. Ferrari was humiliated. Ford was immortalized. 210 miles per hour, brutal power. The GT40 was less a car, more a rocket strapped to vengeance. 2. 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429. Homologation rules said Ford needed to sell its massive new 429 cubic inch V8 in a street car. Ford said, "Fine, let's wedge it into a Mustang." What came out was the 1969 Boss 429, a brawler dressed like a muscle coupe. 375 horsepower was the official number. But this beast made closer to 500. Raw, unfiltered thunder bolted into the front of a hand-built car. It was barely street legal, too wide, too loud, too aggressive for suburbia, and that's why it mattered. The Boss 429 wasn't about comfort. It was about confrontation. 3. 1965 Shelby GT 350R. Most Mustangs were meant for cruising. The 1965 GT 350R, that was Carroll Shelby going feral. He stripped the interior, threw out rear seats, cranked up the 289 V8, and what was left was a weaponized Mustang that didn't just win, it humiliated Corvettes on the track. This was the first Mustang to dominate SCCA racing. It didn't even try to look civilized. Side pipes, racing stripes, and the scream of a track-bred soul. Shelby didn't ask Ford's permission. He asked what was possible, and then he went past it. 4. 1985 Ford Mustang SVO. The 80s were strange. Muscle cars were dying. But Ford's Special Vehicle Operations team wasn't done fighting. Their answer? The 1985 Mustang SVO, a 2.3-liter turbo four-cylinder with 205 horsepower, a manual gearbox, and suspension tuned for curves, not stoplights. No chrome, no badge flexing, just raw driver connection. It wasn't about brawn, it was about brains. And for once, Detroit delivered a car that challenged Porsches instead of Camaros. The Mustang SVO was ahead of its time, and like most rebels, it died misunderstood. But it left a mark that still echoes in every performance Mustang today. 5. 1986 Ford RS 200. Group B was Motorsport's Wild West, and the 1986 Ford RS 200, its most feral outlaw, mid-engine, all-wheel drive, turbocharged fury packed into a compact fiberglass shell. It made 450-plus horsepower in race trim and could hit 60 in just under 3 seconds. It wasn't built for roads. It was built to tear them apart. Only 200 were made. The RS 200 wasn't just illegal. It was barely survivable. Group B was banned after too many deaths, and this monster vanished almost as fast as it appeared. But in that brief, glorious window, the RS 200 proved that Ford could build insanity with a VIN number. 6. 1964 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt. How do you take down Chrysler at the drag strip? If you're Ford, you build a missile called the Thunderbolt. In 1964, Ford took the mid-size Fairlane, gutted it, then shoved in a 427 high-riser FIV8, making over 600 horsepower. Fiberglass body panels, plexiglass windows, no back seat, no insulation. It weighed just over 3,000 pounds and ran the quarter mile in the low 11s, in factory form. Only 100 were made, all built for NHRA Superstock. This wasn't a car, it was a launch code. 7. 1925 Ford Model T Hot Rods. The Model T was never supposed to be fast, but after World War II, returning GIs had different ideas. They took Grandpa's old T, stripped it to the bones, dropped in flathead V8s, chopped the tops, and created a movement, the hot rod. This wasn't Ford doing the rule-breaking, it was the people. But the platform, pure Ford. Affordable, simple, and begging to be rebuilt into something more. Without the Model T, there is no car culture, no lowriders, no rat finks, no burnout competitions. This was the spark that lit the fuse. 8. 1964 Ford Fairlane 500. It looked like your dad's daily driver, but under the hood was a NASCAR grade 427 big block, the same engine used in GT40s and Galaxies. Ford didn't advertise it. They didn't have to. Only about 50 were made. And those who had one knew exactly what it was, a Q-ship. Fast, quiet, and devastatingly fast from a stoplight. This was Ford at its most sinister, building monsters that didn't even wear a costume. 9. 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1. The Mach 1 wasn't just more power, it was more everything. Ford took the Mustang's looks, performance, and poise and turned the volume way up. You could spec it with a 428 Cobra jet, functional hood scoops, spoilers, racing stripes. It was a muscle car wrapped in a fighter jet silhouette. But it wasn't just flash, it handled, it responded, and it looked like the car a fighter pilot would drive on the way to his court-martial. The Mach 1 was elegance and aggression blended with rare precision. 10. 1969 Mercury Cyclone Spoiler 2. Built during NASCAR's Aero Wars, the Cyclone Spoiler 2 was Ford's secret bullet. Under the Mercury badge, it flew under the radar. But that sleek nose, flush grille, and elongated body weren't just for show. They were engineered to slip through Daytona's air like a knife through silk. Powered by a big block 429, it was born for 200 miles per hour ovals. Just 351 were built to satisfy homologation. And while Dodge had the winged Daytona, Ford had the sharpened blade. It didn't scream. It sliced. Some muscle cars made headlines, but this list, it's the kind of horsepower heat that nearly vanished. Factory misfits, outlaw builds, and sleeper bullets that blasted past the competition, and often the law. This is the top 10 muscle cars that were way too fast for their own good. The back alley beasts, the underground icons, the cars that shocked the system. 10. 1968 Mercury Cougar GTE. You might know the Cougar as Ford's upscale Mustang twin, but in 1968, Mercury stuffed a 427 cubic inch big block under the hood and gave it a name to match, the GTE 7.0. Only 357 of these monsters were made. On paper, the 427 V8 made 390 horsepower. In reality, it made closer to 425. With a top-loader 4-speed and 3.91 gears, the Cougar GTE roared through the quarter-mile in just over 13 seconds. This wasn't a pony car. It was a predator dressed in chrome. The GTE was never meant to be flashy. It wore its power like a tuxedo with brass knuckles. While everyone looked at Mustangs, the real gearheads knew the big cat was lurking in the shadows. Quieter, rarer, and deadlier. It didn't need stripes to be dangerous. It just needed throttle. 9. 1971 Plymouth Duster 340 Twister. By 1971, the muscle car war was losing steam. Insurance rates were up, emissions regs were cracking down. But Plymouth wasn't done fighting. The Duster 340 Twister was their last street-legal punch, and it came out swinging. The 340 was small but furious, rated at 275 horsepower, but every dyno run screamed past 300. With just 3,100 pounds to carry, the Duster flew off the line. 0 to 60 in 6.5 seconds, quarter in the mid-14s, and this was with street tires. Its light weight made it more nimble than most muscle, and its price made it accessible. But what made it dangerous was how sneaky it was. No massive hood scoops, no bold claims, just a little A-body coupe that outran cars twice its size. A true street brawler, punching way above its class and never asking permission. 8. 1967 Rambler Rebel SST 390. Here's one most people don't even know existed, the Rebel SST 390. American Motors dropped this ticking time bomb into the family-friendly Rambler lineup, and suddenly, Mom's grocery getter was clocking low 14 seconds on the strip. The 390 V8 put out 315 horsepower with torque just under 430 pound-feet. That was serious grunt for a sedan. Add in a 4-barrel carb, dual exhaust, and AMC's best suspension, and you had a quiet assassin. It didn't look like a muscle car. That was the point. No flashy spoilers or wide tires. Just a clean mid-size car that, when provoked, left rubber down the street and smoke in its rear view. It's one of the earliest true sleepers, and the spiritual ancestor to every Hellcat-owning dad who just wants to go get milk. 7. 1970 Pontiac GTO Judge Ram Air 4. The GTO Judge was already a legend, but in 1970, Pontiac turned it into something truly unhinged. The Ram Air 4 engine was a race-spec anomaly stuffed into a showroom muscle car, complete with forged internals, aluminum intake, and high-lift cam. Rated at 370 horsepower, but unofficially making well over 400, this thing howled to 6,500 RPM and launched like a dragster. Quarter-mile times in the high 13s were normal, and it could rev forever. Pontiac didn't build many. Only 627 GTOs got the Ram Air 4 in 1970, and fewer than half were Judges. It was a secret handshake between the factory and the fanatics, a nod to those who really knew what horsepower meant. This wasn't just fast. It was high-strung, temperamental, and thrilling. A beast barely tamed for the street. 6. 1972 Buick GS Stage 1 Riviera. When people talk about muscle cars, the Riviera almost never comes up. But for a short window in 1972, Buick made the GS Stage 1 version, and it turned this luxury land yacht into a torque-chucking monster. Buick's 455 cubic inch V8 was already legendary, but the Stage 1 added hotter cams, larger valves, and more aggressive timing. Result? Acclaimed 270 horsepower, thanks to new net ratings, but real-world numbers closer to 400 and 510 pound-feet of torque. The Riviera GS was 18 feet long and weighed over 2 tons, but mash the gas, and it moved like a cheetah in silk slippers. Quiet, smooth, terrifyingly quick. It was proof you didn't need stripes to be a muscle car, just a big heart and an even bigger engine. 5. 1969 AMC AMX Trans AM Edition. The AMC AMX was already unique, a 2-seat muscle coupe with a short wheelbase and aggressive styling. But in 1969, AMC built a special edition homologation model for SCCA Trans Am racing, and it was downright feral. It came with a 390 cubic inch V8, high-flow heads, and optional 4-speed. Horsepower was rated at 325, but like all AMC performance engines, it ran hot and hit hard. The car could hit 60 in about 6 seconds flat, and quarter-mile times in the low 14 seconds were common. But what made it dangerous was how unforgiving it was. The short chassis made it darty at high speeds. One wrong move, and the rear end was gone. It was a track weapon shoved into street trim, barely. Only a handful were made. And the ones that survived, now they're treasured by the few who can handle them. 4. 1975 Monteverde 375-4. This one's a curveball, and the ultimate international outlaw. Built in Switzerland but powered by American muscle, the Monteverde 375-4 was a luxury missile with a Chrysler 440 Magnum V8 making over 400 horsepower. It looked like a limousine, but moved like a drag car. 0 to 60 in under 6 seconds, with quarter-mile speeds that rivaled Corvettes of the same era. Monteverde hand-built each car, using Swiss craftsmanship and Detroit brutality in perfect fusion. Only a few dozen were made, and fewer still survive. It was never meant for American streets, but if one ever pulled up beside you, you'd remember the moment forever. This was global muscle before anyone thought it could exist. Rare, beautiful, terrifying. 3. 1969 Mercury Cyclone Spoiler 2. Built for one thing, winning at NASCAR. The Cyclone Spoiler 2 was Mercury's answer to the Charger Daytona and Ford Talladega. A street-legal homologation special with a wind tunnel-tested nose and a 428 Cobra jet under the hood. Horsepower? North of 400. Top speed? 150+ miles per hour. Only 519 were built. Most people didn't even know they were being sold. Its long nose and flush grille gave it an alien look. But it worked. On the track, it stuck like glue. On the street, it looked like a prototype that escaped from the proving grounds. It was banned almost immediately. Too fast, too slippery, too good. 2. 1971 Dodge Charger RT 446 pack. Not the famous Hemi, but just as wild. The 446 pack used triple two-barrel carbs to deliver 390 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. It was cheaper than the Hemi, but every bit as brutal. The Charger RT in 1971 had heavy-duty everything: suspension, cooling, brakes. It was built to take a beating and come back for more. 0 to 60 in 6.2 seconds, quarter in the low 14s, but it felt faster. Why? Because it sounded like the apocalypse and moved like a bar fight in fast forward. It was violent, loud, and barely legal. No wonder the cops loved to hate it. 1. 1969 Copo Camaro ZL1. Here it is again, because nothing outruns it. When Chevy let you direct order motors engineered for Can-Am racing, what else could you do but gun it? Aluminum 427 big block. Dyno proven, closer to 500 horsepower. Low 11 second quarter miles, on street tires. Shocks like rail tracks. Frame stiffened. Only 69 were built. It's pure, raw, unapologetic speed, a street-legal outlaw engineered to tear up the strip. And it still sets records decades later. Legend doesn't do this car justice. It is the legend. In the golden age of American muscle, these machines weren't just for Sunday drag strips or parking lot showdowns. No, some of the most iconic V8 beasts ever built lived double lives. Beneath the polished chrome and rumbling exhausts, they were the preferred weapons of smugglers, bank robbers, and bootleggers. Today, we're taking a high-octane dive into 10 legendary muscle cars that ruled both the streets and the shadows. Some you know, some you'd never expect. All of them had criminal intent written between the lines of their build sheets. 1. 1969 Dodge Charger RT. You think Dodge Charger, and maybe you picture the Dukes of Hazzard or Dom Toretto. But long before Hollywood, this car was a moonshiner's dream machine. With the 440 Magnum or the legendary 426 Hemi under its hood, the 69 Charger was pure speed in a straight line. Its fastback body wasn't just for style, it cut through the wind like a blade, perfect for high-speed chases through Appalachian backroads. Moonshine runners loved the huge trunk space. It could swallow crates of mason jars without breaking a sweat. Compared to police interceptors of the time, the Charger had a top-end advantage that meant one thing. If you saw taillights disappearing into the trees, you weren't catching them. 2. 1970 Plymouth Roadrunner. Cheap, loud, and ridiculously quick. The Roadrunner was the blue-collar speed demon. Smugglers favored it for one reason: stealth in plain sight. A stripped-down muscle car with a cartoon bird badge didn't scream criminal mastermind, but with a 426 Hemi or a 446 pack, it could obliterate most pursuers. Stories circulate of these cars ferrying contraband from coastal drop points deep inland, the roar of their engines masking the quiet jingle of illicit cargo. Against rivals like the Chevy Chevelle SS, the Roadrunner's lightweight body gave it a crucial edge in quick getaways. 3. 1966 Chevrolet Impala SS. The mid-60s Impala SS was the muscle car you didn't see coming. To the untrained eye, it was just another big Chevy coupe. But in the hands of organized crime, it became the perfect blend of muscle and menace. The SS 427 package turned it into a 425 horsepower street bruiser, but it kept a low profile. No garish stripes, no flashy spoilers. Mafia drivers loved it because it blended into traffic until the moment it needed to vanish at triple-digit speeds. In a world of loud paint and drag race stripes, this car was a shadow. 4. 1971 Ford Torino Cobra. When Ford dropped the 429 Cobra Jet into the Torino, they didn't just make a muscle car, they made a bank robber's getaway ticket. Its aggressive front fascia looked like it wanted to punch through traffic, and with up to 375 horsepower, it could. In several documented heists in the early 70s, Torino Cobras were used as switch cars, fast enough to shake the first wave of pursuit before the loot was transferred to something more discreet. It wasn't the most famous Ford muscle car, but for those in the know, it was a silent assassin. 5. 1968 Pontiac GTO. The GTO was the godfather of muscle, but along the US-Mexico border, it was also known for something else: speed-running illegal goods through desert highways. The 400 cubic inch V8 was more than enough to push past rural sheriffs, and Pontiac's suspension tuning gave it an edge in handling that big block Chevys lacked. Rumor has it some GTOs even had hidden compartments under the rear seats, perfect for contraband too valuable to leave to chance. 6. 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1. Most muscle cars screamed for attention. The GSX Stage 1 whispered, then punched you in the chest. Packing 510 pound-feet of torque from its 455 cubic inch V8, this was one of the fastest accelerating cars of its era. High-end crime bosses favored it because it combined performance with comfort, leather seats, smooth ride, and the ability to outpace nearly anything in a straight line. Against Mopars and Chevys, the GSX often surprised pursuers who underestimated the Buick. 7. 1969 Chevrolet Camaro Z28. While the Z28 was built for Trans Am racing, its street version became a favorite for urban gangs in cities like Detroit and Chicago. Its small block 302 was high-revving and agile, making it perfect for darting through tight streets and alleys. It didn't have the massive trunk of a Charger, but for quick smash and grabs or transporting stolen goods a few blocks before ditching it, the Z28 was lethal. It was a street brawler compared to the highway bruisers on this list. 8. 1970 Oldsmobile 442W30. If the Roadrunner was a sledgehammer, the 442W30 was a precision-guided missile. With its 455 V8 and functional hood scoops feeding cold air directly to the carb, it launched like it had a grudge against the pavement. For certain Midwest gangs, the 442 was the perfect muscle car, fast enough to outrun law enforcement, but rare enough that police departments weren't fully familiar with its capabilities. In a world where everyone looked for Chevys and Dodges, the olds slipped through. 9. 1967 Mercury Cougar GT. The Cougar GT wasn't as famous as its Mustang sibling, but in the late 60s, it was a smart choice for criminals who needed a balance of speed and subtlety. The GT package brought a 390 big block and upgraded suspension, but the Cougar's refined styling didn't scream street racer, perfect for blending in until the chase began. In some cases, Cougars were used as decoy vehicles during larger operations, outrunning police to draw heat away from the real target. 10. 1970 Dodge Challenger RTSE. If you needed to move something or someone from one end of the country to the other, the Challenger RTSE was a prime candidate. With the 426 Hemi, it could cruise at high speeds for hours, eating up interstate miles like popcorn. Its combination of comfort, speed, and endurance made it ideal for long-haul smuggling. Compared to the Charger, the Challenger's slightly smaller frame made it more agile, while still packing the Mopar muscle that left police interceptors gasping. Some cars were so dangerous, so unfairly powerful, that racing bodies didn't just regulate them, they erased them. These aren't the headline-grabbing Daytonas or Boss 429s. No, this is the dark underbelly of muscle car history. We're talking about ghost cars, machines that barely made it to the track before they were outlawed, silenced, or buried in backlot storage yards. From twisted prototype builds to factory freaks that never saw the light of day again, these 10 cars were deemed too fast, too wild, or too strange to compete. And yet, they existed. So, buckle up. We're diving into 10 obscure American muscle cars that got banned from racing, not because they broke rules, but because they rewrote them. 1. 1963 Chevrolet Corvair Lakewood SS. The Corvairs got a reputation, but this one, it's practically a myth. The Lakewood SS was a station wagon turned sideways handling street assassin. With rear-mounted, turbocharged, flat 6-power and lightweight panels, Chevy reportedly built a few under the table to gauge SCCA viability. Problem? The car's handling was infamous. On tight tracks, it pivoted like a hovercraft on ice. Drivers loved it, until one flipped during a time trial. The SCCA didn't wait. They immediately banned all wagon body platforms from circuit events, snuffing out the Lakewood SS before it could go full beast mode. 2. 1969 Pontiac Grand Prix Special. This isn't the Grand Prix you're thinking of. This was a skunkworks project, an early attempt to infiltrate Trans Am racing with something bigger, heavier, and meaner. It had a prototype 455 HO engine, stripped body panels, and bizarre weight distribution. It was fast, too fast for its size. It started blowing past Camaros and Mustangs during private testing. When rival teams got wind, Pontiac was told in no uncertain terms, "You're not bringing that into Trans Am." Before a single sanctioned race, the rulebook got an update banning large displacement full-size coupes. 3. 1970 Ford Torino King Cobra. The King Cobra wasn't just a name, it had an aerodynamic snout, hidden headlights, and a plan: kill the Charger Daytona at its own game. Underneath, a NASCAR-ready 429 Boss engine and experimental front-end balance tech. But it came too late. NASCAR had just banned aero cars from running engines over 305 cubic inches. Overnight, the King Cobra became obsolete. Ford shelved the program, and the few that escaped are now garage royalty. Muscle monsters never given a chance to race. 4. 1967 Plymouth GTX Stage 2. Built for NHRA Superstock, the GTX Stage 2 packed a hand-tuned 426 Hemi and short-run headers, reportedly delivering over 550 horsepower straight from the crate. It ran sub-11 seconds right off the trailer, and that scared people. Within months of debuting, NHRA moved to restrict what modifications could be made at the factory level. The Stage 2 was suddenly illegal for its class. Racers were told, either detune or don't show up. Most chose to hide them instead, creating an underground drag racing legend. 5. 1968 AMC AMX RT. AMC never got its flowers in muscle car history, but this car, it almost changed that. The AMX RT was a one-off built for SCCA testing with a custom 401 cubic inch engine, aluminum hood, and ultra-low weight. It was a Trans Am killer. The SCCA wasn't amused. AMC was accused of violating homologation requirements, and the car was barred from entering national races. Even the company backed off fast. Just like that, the AMX RT vanished. No records, no press, just whispers in old garages. 6. 1966 Buick Wildcat GS. This was the muscle car for gangsters. Big, brutal, and practically armored. The Wildcat GS had a 425 nailhead V8 with torque that could bend axles. Buick attempted to enter it in early NHRA stock classes until it consistently destroyed lighter competition. Its raw weight gave it strange grip advantages off the line, creating a bizarre loophole. NHRA closed that door quick, banning certain weight-to-power ratios and effectively eliminating the Wildcat GS from all competitive racing. 7. 1969 Dodge Coronet A12. The A12 package was all about minimalism and violence. 446-pack engine, lift-off fiberglass hood, and zero frills. But what made it wild was its sleeper lineage. One prototype, uncovered years later, ran quarter miles in the tens thanks to experimental gearing and a stripped chassis. That prototype never got approval. NHRA caught wind and banned factory lightweights with non-standard welds, ending the A-12's upgrade path. 8. 1971 Mercury Cyclone CJ. Mercury wanted a Goliath slayer, and the Cyclone CJ nearly was. Powered by a 429 Cobra jet and tested on Ford's proving grounds, this monster set records against GM's finest in private competitions, but Ford canceled the racing program before it went public. Why? Insiders claim execs feared backlash from regulators watching the rise in fatal racing incidents. The Cyclone CJ was quietly canceled, prototypes crushed. It was a ghost, rumored, feared, never confirmed. 9. 1970 Oldsmobile 442 W30. This wasn't your granddad's Olds. The W30 Night Racer was a private build blessed by engineers at Lansing Assembly. It had blueprinting, weight shaving, and stealth tuning beyond spec. A few even had dealer-installed nitrous. Racers entered them into regional circuits, until one got caught with an illegal combo of factory parts. The NHRA changed the parts-matching rules, effectively banning custom-tuned W30s from entering as stock. The Night Racer faded into myth, known only by those who lined up against it. 10. 1964 Dodge Polara Superstock. In the early 60s, Dodge shipped a small number of Polaras to desert states with special rear ends, oversized carb setups, and off-road drag packages. They were sand drag legends, cranking ungodly torque across dusty straights. Problem? Too many non-factory hands were involved. Sanctioning bodies questioned their authenticity and soon outlawed them from formal drag races. Polara SS builds faded into obscurity, found today only in half-sunken sheds across Arizona. These weren't just muscle cars, they were weapons, built to test the limits of what racing bodies would tolerate. And when they crossed those lines, they were erased, not because they were illegal, but because they were too good. They bent physics, terrified competition, and rewrote rulebooks. Their legacies live on not through trophies, but rumors, engine blocks, and the occasional barn find that still makes hearts race. While the Mustang and Charger battle for the spotlight, there's a graveyard of forgotten muscle that once ruled the street. Cars that smoked GTOs, embarrassed Corvettes, and rewrote the rulebook before vanishing into obscurity. These are the 10 best muscle cars of the 1960s that you've probably never heard of, and once you hear their stories, you'll never forget them again. 1. 1969 AMX-3. Imagine if America built a mid-engine supercar to rival Ferrari, and then scrapped it before it hit the streets. That was the AMX-3, a wild project by AMC, built with the help of Italdesign and ex-Ferrari engineer Giotto Bizzarini. Only 6 prototypes were ever made. Powered by a 390 cubic inch V8, making 340 horsepower, this beast could do 0 to 60 in 5 seconds flat in 1969. That's Lamborghini Miura territory. But AMC got cold feet. Costs ballooned, management panicked, and what could have been America's first true supercar got locked in a warehouse. Today, each prototype is worth over $1 million, and they still look like they've landed from the future. 2. 1964 Studebaker Superlark. Studebaker. Yeah, not exactly a name that screams performance, right? But in 1964, just before the brand flatlined, they dropped a bomb. The Superlark R3. Armed with a supercharged 304.5 cubic inch V8, pushing out 335 horsepower, this compact coupe could rocket from 0 to 60 in under 5.5 seconds, faster than a Pontiac GTO. Period tests by Hot Rod Magazine had jaws on the floor. It looked like your granddad's Sunday cruiser, but it could outrun just about anything on Woodward Avenue. The Superlark was Studebaker's last punch, and man, it connected. 3. 1966 Dodge Coronet WO-23. Before the Charger took over drag strips, Dodge had a secret weapon, the 1966 Coronet WO-23 Hemi. Think of it as a missile disguised as a grocery getter. Under the hood, A race-prepped 426 Hemi making a conservatively rated 425 horsepower, though insiders say it was closer to 500 plus. Stripped of creature comforts and packed with fiberglass panels, it was built purely to dominate. And dominate it did. Quarter-mile times hovered around 10.5 seconds in the 60s. Only 55 were ever made, and most went straight to drag teams. If you blinked, you missed it, and then you got beat. 4. 1968 Mercury Cougar XR7G. Carroll Shelby is known for the GT 350, the Cobra, and the Daytona Coupe. But in 1968, he took a detour into the world of luxury muscle. The XR7G was a Shelby-tuned Mercury Cougar. It came with fog lights, hood scoops, competition suspension, and a choice of Ford's best big blocks, including the 390, 427, and 428 Cobra Jet. With up to 390 horsepower, it was no show pony, but sales flopped. Only 619 were ever built. Most people never even knew Shelby touched a Cougar. Today, it's one of the rarest Shelby-touched vehicles on Earth, and easily the most overlooked. 5. 1967 Rambler Rebel Machine Prototype. Before the 70s, Rebel Machine stunned drag strips, AMC tested the waters with a 1967 prototype, a two-door Rambler Rebel packing a 343 cubic inch Typhoon V8, performance headers, and side exhaust. Though it wasn't officially sold, AMC built a few for press tests, and Car Life magazine ran a 0 to 60 in 6.3 seconds, blisteringly quick for a mid-size sedan with no racing pedigree. It had stripes, chrome, and an attitude. But AMC didn't think America was ready yet. 2 years later, the Rebel Machine was unleashed. But that 67 prototype? That's the real ghost story. 6. 1965 Buick Grand Sport Skylark. Buick, known for quiet luxury, quietly made one of the best early muscle cars, the 1965 Skylark GS. Stuffed with a 401 cubic inch nailhead V8 rated at 325 horsepower, the real magic was its torque. A brutal 445 pound-feet, hitting like a sledgehammer from just 2,800 RPM. Buick even badged it 445 Wildcat, not for horsepower, but for torque. It could hit 60 in under 7 seconds, outrun Mustangs, and still glide over potholes like a Cadillac. No stripes, no wing, just pure street-brawling class. 7. 1968 Pontiac Firebird Sprint. Not all power comes from cubic inches. The Firebird Sprint came with an overhead cam inline 6, a 4-barrel carb, and up to 230 horsepower. Tuned for revs and balance, it handled better than its big V8 brothers, and even came with a close ratio 4-speed and heavy-duty suspension. It was Pontiac's nod to European sports coupes. Think Alfa Romeo with Detroit muscle. But buyers wanted torque, not tact. The Sprint died quietly in '69. Today, it's a cult favorite, and one of the most refined muscle cars of its time. 8. 1963 Ford Galaxy R-Code 427. Before Mustangs ruled the road, Ford was terrorizing drag strips with this land yacht, the R-Code Galaxy. Under the hood, a dual-quad 427 V8, conservatively listed at 425 horsepower, but real output was closer to 480 plus. Ford engineers built this to beat Mopars at the NHRA, and it worked. Despite weighing over 4,000 pounds, this brute could run the quarter in 13 seconds flat. With headers, even faster. It was the last breath before muscle went mid-size, and it hit like a freight train. 9. 1967 Plymouth Barracuda Formula S 383. Before the Cuda became a legend, it was a fastback oddball. But in 1967, Plymouth stuffed a 383 V8 into the compact Formula S, creating a sleeper that could go head-to-head with bigger muscle cars. Rated at 280 horsepower, it was detuned to fit under the tight hood. But in the real world, it ran with the best. Magazines called it a Camaro killer in disguise. But it got buried under the GTO, the Charger, and even the Mustang. Only hardcore fans remember it today, and that's a crime. 10th, 1962, Pontiac Catalina 421 Super Duty. Before the GTO was even a twinkle in John DeLorean's eye, there was the Catalina 421 Super Duty. Built for NHRA domination, it packed forged internals, aluminum body panels, and a brutal 421 cubic inch V8 that made 405 horsepower on paper. In reality, well over 450 horsepower with trap speeds over 120 miles per hour in the quarter mile. It ate Chevys, terrorized Mopars, and laid the blueprint for what we now call muscle cars. It's the car that whispered, "What if we put our biggest engine in our smallest body?" And the industry never looked back. Imagine sinking $500,000 into a rusted-out shell of Detroit steel just to bring it back to life. Not to flip, not for profit, but for glory. For the roar of a rebuilt V8. For the ghost of a burnout past. These are the 10 most expensive muscle car restorations ever done. 1. 1971 Hemi Cuda Convertible, $3.5 million restoration. Let's start with a unicorn, the 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda Convertible. Think of it as the Mona Lisa of Mopars. But one of these legends sat for decades, its body a brittle shell, its heart, a dual-quad 426 Hemi, long gone. Enter a collector with deep pockets and deeper passion. Over $3.5 million was poured into a nuts and bolts restoration, including fabricating exact replica parts that no longer existed. The paint, factory-correct, plum-crazy purple. The drivetrain, entirely re-engineered to match its original build sheet. What emerged wasn't just a car, it was a resurrection, and it sold at auction for north of $3 million. 2. 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona, $750,000 Aero Resurrection. You've seen the nose cone, you've gawked at the 23-inch wing. But one Daytona, buried in an Alabama barn for 30 years, came back from the dead at a cost of $750,000. This wasn't just any Daytona, it was a 440 Magnum, 4-speed, factory-red car. The resto team spent thousands of hours just reconstructing the front fascia, piecing together a handmade aero kit with aircraft-grade materials. Even the rivets matched 1969 specs. Why go this deep? Because this car was one of only 503 built for homologation. It wasn't just fast, it was born to win NASCAR. And with Richard Petty behind the wheel of its sibling, it did. 3. 1970 Chevelle SS 454 LS6, $500,000 to find true muscle. On paper, the 1970 Chevelle SS 454 LS6 was a street-legal nuke. 450 horsepower, solid lifter cam, 500 lb-ft of torque. The apex predator of GM's muscle era. But to find one with its matching numbers engine and cowl induction hood intact? Almost impossible. That didn't stop a Michigan collector who dumped $500,000 into a bone-dry frame to build the perfect example. Every bolt was tagged, every part date-coded. Even the chalk marks on the firewall were restored using original factory photos. The interior? Period-correct black vinyl down to the stitch count. Today, it sits in a climate-controlled vault. Untouched, not driven. Preserved like a T-Rex fossil with rally stripes. 4. 1967 Shelby GT 500 Super Snake, $2.2 million rebirth. The 1967 Shelby GT 500 Super Snake was Carroll Shelby's personal moonshot. A GT 500 fitted with a 427 race motor from the GT40 Le Mans program. Only one was built. It vanished. Then in 2018, a second was constructed, faithfully cloned using original Shelby blueprints, and the project cost over $2.2 million. Everything, suspension geometry, transmission ratios, oil cooler design, was reverse engineered to reflect Shelby's vision. The car now pushes 600-plus horsepower, dressed in Wimbledon white and blue Le Mans stripes. It's not just a car, it's what happens when mythology is rebuilt with a blank check. 5. 1969 Pontiac GTO Judge, $475,000 Judgment Day. If the Chevelle was brute force, the Pontiac GTO Judge was its psychedelic cousin. loud, flashy, unapologetically over the top. One restoration hit a staggering $475,000 thanks to its carousel red paint, Ram Air 4 engine, and manual 4-speed transmission. The Judge was stripped to bare metal, dipped, de-rusted, and rebuilt with OEM parts sourced globally. Even the hood top was rebuilt with original NOS internals. But the kicker? The owner never intended to sell. It was a personal project. 6. 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1, 600,000 Gentleman's Brawler. The 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1 begs to differ. One example underwent a $600,000 concours restoration, partly due to the rarity. Only 678 GSXs were made, and the Stage 1 package turned it into a luxury rocket ship. 510 pound-feet of torque, posy traction, and Buick's signature creature comforts. The resto involved hand recasting interior trim pieces, restoring the 8-track radio, and rebuilding the entire engine block from scratch after cracks were found in the original. That engine? A 455 that could roast rear tires at highway speeds. It's fast, it's rare, and it's quiet about it, which might be the most badass thing of all. 7. 1965 Shelby GT 350R $1.1 million race-bred resurrection. Born for the track, most Shelby GT 350Rs lived hard, died young, and were stripped for parts. But one, wrecked in the 70s and forgotten in a Texas field, was pulled back into the light. Its resurrection took over 5 years and $1.1 million, with forensic-level attention to detail. The team used ultraviolet scans to match the original Wimbledon white paint. They 3D printed tooling jigs to replicate the unique suspension mounts. Why so much work? Because this wasn't a clone. It was a real R model, one of just 36, and each lap it turned at SCCA events added to its mystique. Now, it lives in a museum, but it looks ready to fire up and terrorize a road course. 8. 1970 Oldsmobile 442 W30, $525,000 sleeper savior. Oldsmobile rarely gets its flowers, but the 1974 42 W30 was a hammer in a silk glove, underrated, overbuilt, and brutally fast. One owner dropped $525,000 into bringing his W30 back from the brink, rebuilding the red inner fenders, factory aluminum intake, and even sourcing the correct 2 engine stamp. Most of the cost came from hand-sourcing W machine-specific parts that were discarded back in the day. The result? A 370 horsepower street brawler that looks like your dad's commuter until it blows your doors off. 9. 1969 Camaro ZL1, $1.5 million aluminum madness. You've heard of the ZL1, but did you know it started life as a Chevrolet experiment? In 1969, Chevy built 69 Camaros with the all-aluminum 427 ZL1 engine, a motor designed for Can-Am racing. One survivor was found missing half its engine, the body riddled with rust. The restoration? $1.5 million. Most of that went into fabricating a new ZL1 block from scratch, since GM never offered it to the public. Even the cylinder heads had to be machined from archived GM blueprints. Today, this ZL1 sounds like a war machine and drives like a rolling grenade. It's not a car. It's a science experiment gone wonderfully wrong. 10. 1968 Dodge Charger RT, $700,000 Hollywood resurrection. The last entry isn't rare by numbers. It's rare by story. This 1968 Dodge Charger RT was used as a stunt car in a forgotten B-movie. It was wrecked, burned, and left in a junkyard. But a fan recognized the VIN and realized it was an on-screen survivor. A 6-year, $700,000 restoration followed, preserving all the stunt scars while making it roadworthy. The team rebuilt the 440 Magnum, sourced era-correct black Steelies, and even used Hollywood prop photos to match panel gaps and dents. It's a perfect time capsule, a brutal mix of fantasy and fire. And it might be the only resto where the goal was to make it look imperfect, just like it did on screen. You hear it before you see it, that guttural roar, that chest-thumping rumble. It's not just a sound, It's a warning, because when a Mopar rolls up, it doesn't ask for permission. It announces war. These aren't just muscle cars. They're street-legal weapons, bred in Detroit, feared on drag strips, and often too powerful for their own good. Some were banned, some were barely legal, and all of them walked the line between performance and pure chaos. This is the countdown of the 10 most dangerous Mopars ever built. 10. 1969 Dodge Charger 500 Hemi. The 1969 Dodge Charger 500 looked tame until it hit the track. Dodge was desperate to beat Ford and Mercury in NASCAR, so they took their beloved Charger, slapped on a flush Coronet grille, a sloped rear window, and called it the 500. But the real magic was under the hood. A 426 Hemi V8 pushing 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. On the high banks, this thing flew, literally. With enough downforce to stay glued, it hit 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds and blew past 140 miles per hour like it was coasting. It was the precursor to the legendary Daytona, and it changed NASCAR forever. But it was too raw for the street. The aero package made it twitchy at high speeds. Drivers said it handled like a loaded missile. It was a warning shot. Dodge was just getting started. 9. 1970 Plymouth Superbird Hemi. The Superbird wasn't just a car, it was a missile with license plates. Its beak nose and sky-high rear wing weren't for show. They were engineered to embarrass everyone at Daytona. Powered by the same 426 Hemi as the Charger 500, the Superbird could scream through the quarter mile in 13.5 seconds. But it wasn't just speed, it was stability. That aero kit generated serious downforce, letting Richard Petty dominate NASCAR with it. But here's the catch. To qualify for racing, they had to sell it to the public. So innocent civilians ended up behind the wheel of a race-bred monster with sketchy brakes and limited rear visibility. One mistake, and it wasn't a muscle car. It was a flying brick. 8. 1966 Dodge Coronet W023. This wasn't a car. It was a loophole on wheels. The 1966 Coronet W023 was a factory drag racer disguised as a production vehicle. Dodge gutted everything. No rear seats, no sound deadening, even thinner glass, just to make it lighter. Then they dropped in a 426 Hemi with dual 4-barrel carbs, pushing a savage 425 horsepower. Quarter-mile times dipped below 11 seconds with slicks. That's terrifying speed, in a car with no creature comforts and almost no safety features. The W023 was so aggressive, it was barely streetable. It idled like a jackhammer, overheated in traffic, and felt like it wanted to kill you if you got too cocky. You didn't drive this car. You held on for dear life. 7. 1971 Plymouth GTX 440 plus 6. The 1971 GTX was supposed to be refined, a muscle car in a tuxedo. But when you checked the right boxes, it turned into a straight-up street bully. The 440 plus 6 setup gave you 3 2-barrel carbs and 390 horsepower of snarling torque. 0 to 60? Just over 5 seconds. Quarter mile? Low 13s. But it wasn't the numbers, it was the attitude. The triple carbs whistled like a banshee, and the car surged like it was chasing something. Or someone. It wasn't as wild as the Hemi cars, but in some ways, it was more dangerous. It pretended to be civil, luring you in, letting your guard down, and then hit you with a wall of torque that could light the tires in third gear. 6. 1968 Dodge Dart LO 23 Superstock. Built to win drag races straight off the lot, the 1968 Dart LO 23 Superstock wasn't just rare, it was ridiculous. Dodge sent them to Hurst Performance for final assembly, where the cars were hand-built with one mission: destroy the quarter mile. The 426 Hemi inside was underrated at 425 horsepower. Real figures were closer to 500 plus. The body was stripped to the bone, with fiberglass fenders, an aluminum hood, and even acid-dipped doors to shave weight. It did 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds and a quarter mile in the mid-10s. No power steering, no power brakes, just raw violence. And here's the kicker. Dodge only made about 80 of them. They were street legal, technically. But letting civilians own these? That was criminally insane. 5. 1970 Dodge Challenger RT. By 1970, the muscle car war was at full blast. The Dodge Challenger was Dodge's late entry, but it came swinging. The RT version with a 426 Hemi wasn't just fast, it was unhinged. With 425 horsepower and a 4-speed manual, it could hit 60 in 5.1 seconds. But it wasn't the numbers. It was the feel, the way the shaker hood twitched when you nailed the throttle, the sound of the Hemi inhaling through dual snorkels, the way it danced on skinny tires with no traction control to save you. The Challenger Hemi was a punk, brash, aggressive, and always ready to fight. And if you couldn't keep up, it wouldn't wait for you. You learned to drive it, or it drove through you. 4. 1964 Plymouth Belvedere. Before the Hemi was legendary, it was feared. The 1964 Plymouth Belvedere was the first car to receive the 426 Hemi, a motor born for the track with cross-bolted mains, hemispherical combustion chambers, and 12.5-to-1 compression. This wasn't a production option. It was a NASCAR and NHRA assassin. The car made around 500 horsepower in race trim and screamed through the quarter in 11 seconds. It looked boxy and innocent, like your uncle's grocery getter, until it screamed past everything on the strip. This is where the danger started. The 426 Hemi proved that Mopar could build engines so powerful, the rules had to be rewritten. And the Belvedere? It was the unassuming package that carried the monster to war. 3. 1970 Plymouth Roadrunner Hemi. With a name like Roadrunner, you'd expect something cute. But in 1970, the Hemi version of this car was a predator, not prey. It packed the 426 with 425 horsepower, but what made it deadly was the weight-to-power ratio and short wheelbase. It was too fast for its chassis. The rear end would break loose without warning, especially in wet conditions. And because it was stripped down, no luxury, just speed, you felt everything. Every twitch, every bite of the tires, every mistake. It sold with a beep-beep horn and cartoon decals, but make no mistake, this thing was a killer cloaked in comedy. A muscle car that laughed while it spun you sideways into oncoming traffic. 2. 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona 426 Hemi. Built purely to dominate NASCAR, the 1969 Daytona was the first car to break 200 miles per hour on a closed course. It was a marvel of engineering. With a 23-inch nose cone, a massive rear wing, and a 426 Hemi that turned gas into lightning. It hit 0 to 60 in 5.1 seconds and the quarter in 13.5, but the top speed? 204 miles per hour in 1969. This was science fiction with a VIN number. Dodge made just enough to homologate it for racing, and suddenly civilians were driving jet planes on the highway. It was so good that NASCAR banned it. Not because it broke the rules, because it broke the game. On the street, it was an untamable animal. With limited visibility and race-tuned aero, it wasn't just fast, it was dangerous. 1. 1965 Dodge Coronet, a 990 Hemi. The 1965 Coronet, a 990, was Mopar's first true street-legal drag monster. Built solely for racing, it was sold to the public in just enough numbers to sneak into NHRA. 426 Hemi. Aluminum nose, plexiglass windows, 11-to-1 compression. This wasn't built for cruising. It was built for obliteration. Factory quarter-mile times were in the tens, and it had zero concessions to comfort or control. This car didn't just push limits, it obliterated them. It taught Mopar that rules were meant to be bent, and that danger was a sales feature. The A990 didn't care about your driving skills. It was the blueprint for every dangerous Mopar that came after. Some legends roar onto the scene, then vanish like smoke in the rear view. They weren't just cars, they were flashes of rebellion, horsepower, and innovation that the world wasn't ready for. Some were killed by regulations, some by bad timing, others simply by being too far ahead of their time. Today we're firing up 10 muscle cars that disappeared without warning, machines that deserved the spotlight but slipped into the shadows. Buckle up, because by the end, you'll be asking how the world ever let these monsters fade away. 1. 1971, AMC Matador. AMC was the scrappy underdog of the muscle wars, and the Matador machine was their last wild haymaker. Painted in outrageous red, white, and blue stripes, it looked like Uncle Sam had built a drag car. Under the hood, a 401 cubic inch V8 pushing 330 horsepower, not class-leading, but raw and underrated. Problem was, by 71, the muscle era was collapsing. Insurance premiums skyrocketed, gas prices crept up, and AMC didn't have the marketing muscle of Ford or Chevy. The Matador machine vanished almost as quickly as it arrived. Today, it's a forgotten firework, brilliant, loud, and gone in an instant. 2. 1969 Dodge Charger 500. Everyone remembers the Daytona with its skyscraper wing, but the Charger 500 was the stepping stone. Built to fix the Charger's aerodynamic flaws, it ditched the tunneled grille and added a flush rear window, making it slipperier for NASCAR. With the legendary 426 Hemi under the hood, it was a missile on wheels. But here's the twist. Dodge built just over 500, and before fans could blink, the Daytona replaced it. The Charger 500 disappeared into obscurity, overshadowed by its more flamboyant sibling. Yet, without it, the Daytona wouldn't exist. It's the unsung middle child of Mopar's Aero dynasty. 3. 1970 Mercury Cyclone Spoiler 2. Ford's lesser-known cousin, Mercury, wanted in on the Aero Wars, too. Enter the Cyclone Spoiler 2, a bizarre, stretched-nose fastback built purely for NASCAR. Its 429 Cobra jet engine pumped out 370 horsepower, and on the track, it was all business. But barely 500 were made, just enough to satisfy NASCAR's rules. Then, new regulations slammed the door shut. The Cyclone Spoiler 2 was gone, erased before most people even knew it existed. Today, it's a ghost of the racing world, a muscle car built not for streets, but for survival. 4. 1974 Pontiac GTO. The GTO was the car that started the muscle craze. But by 74, Pontiac was desperate. They slapped the sacred GTO badge on a Pontiac Ventura, basically a Chevy Nova in disguise. Under the hood, you got a 350 or optional 400 cubic inch V8, but it was a shadow of its former self. Fans were furious. This wasn't the GTO they remembered. It was a downsized imposter. Sales tanked, and Pontiac killed the GTO name altogether. Today, this car feels like a tragic epilogue. The mighty goat reduced to a whisper before vanishing into the fog of the 1970s. 5. 1977 Dodge Charger Daytona SE. Daytona. The name screams speed, victory, and wings slicing through NASCAR air. So what happened in 1977? Chrysler dusted off the badge and glued it to a bloated personal luxury coupe. Instead of a 426 Hemi, you got a 400 cubic inch smog-era V8, gasping out maybe 190 horsepower. Fans didn't buy it. Literally. Sales fizzled, and Dodge quietly buried the Daytona name until the 1980s. Today, the 77 Daytona SE is a forgotten oddball, a sad reminder that sometimes even legends can be misused. 6. 1971 Plymouth GTX 440 plus 6. If the Roadrunner was the cartoon prankster, the GTX was the smooth-talking older brother. It packed serious punch, a 440 cubic inch six-pack V8, pumping out 385 horsepower with enough torque to twist asphalt. But unlike the stripped-down Roadrunner, the GTX came loaded with luxury touches: vinyl, chrome, and class. Sadly, the timing was brutal. By 1971, emissions, insurance, and fuel costs were hammering performance cars. The GTX was discontinued, leaving the Roadrunner to carry on alone. The GTX didn't just disappear, it evaporated, a luxury muscle car too refined for the storm ahead. 7. 1968 Ford Torino Talladega prototype. Before the famous Torino Talladega hit NASCAR, Ford built a handful of prototype versions. test beds for aerodynamics that looked like muscle cars from another planet. Sleeker nose, stretched body, Cobra jet power under the hood. These were the experimental weapons Ford used to study airflow before going all in on NASCAR's aero battles. Almost none survived. Most were scrapped, stripped, or lost to time. But their DNA shaped Ford's racing dominance. The Talladega prototypes proved that sometimes the most important muscle cars are the ones never meant for the public. 8. 1969 Chevrolet Copo Camaro ZL1. The words Copo Camaro are already legendary, but the ZL1 is next level. Built through Chevy's sneaky central office production order, it came with a full aluminum 427 big block. The engine alone cost as much as a new Camaro. Output? Officially 430 horsepower, but in reality, closer to 500. Chevy only built 69. They were too expensive, too wild, too much car for the market. The ZL1 disappeared almost immediately, but today, it's one of the rarest, most valuable Camaros ever, worth millions. Proof that sometimes being too extreme means being forgotten, until decades later. 9. 1973 Buick Century GS Stage 1. Buick wasn't supposed to make muscle cars. They built cushy cruisers for doctors and lawyers. But the Century GS Stage 1 proved them wrong. It had a 455 cubic inch V8, delivering a crushing 370 pound-feet of torque, a sleeper in a tailored suit. Yet 1973 was the wrong year to flex muscle. Emissions killed horsepower, and buyers wanted economy, not torque monsters. The GS Stage 1 vanished quietly, leaving behind almost no legacy. Today, it's a secret handshake among Buick fans, the gentleman's brawler that never got its fight. 10. 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado GT prototype. A front-wheel drive muscle car in 1966? That was Oldsmobile's gamble with the Toronado. Its 425 cubic inch rocket V8 made 385 horsepower, sending all that grunt to the front wheels through a chain-driven transmission. It was radical, dangerous, and way ahead of its time. The GT prototypes pushed it even further. Hotter cams, more compression, brutal acceleration. But the idea of a muscle car with front-wheel drive was just too weird for America. The prototypes were shelved, and the Toronado quietly faded into luxury car territory. What was once revolutionary became forgotten. These are the fastest street monsters of the 1970s you've never heard of. 10. 1971 AMC Hornet SC 360. When everyone else went big, AMC went scrappy. The Hornet SC 360 was a budget hot rod that punched way above its weight. Under its modest hood sat a 360 cubic inch V8, putting out 285 horsepower. Not bad for a compact built by the smallest of Detroit's Big Four. Weighing just over 3,000 pounds, it could rip the quarter mile in 14.6 seconds, faster than some 396 Chevelle. And it wasn't just numbers. This car felt rebellious. No frills, no apologies, just torque, smoke, and attitude. AMC's engineers called it a poor man's AMX, but on the streets, it earned something better. Respect. 9. 1973 Pontiac GTO 455. By 1973, muscle cars were on life support. Insurance rates were brutal, gas prices were worse, and Pontiac's once mighty GTO was a shadow of itself, except for one forgotten monster. The optional 455 cubic inch V8 still cranked out a stout 250 net horsepower, roughly 350 gross, and 370 pound-feet of torque, enough to light up the rear tires in a smoky farewell to the golden era. It wasn't the fastest on paper, but it felt like rebellion on four wheels. The 1973 GTO was the last gasp before Pontiac's Firebird rose to carry the torch. In a world turning slow and soft, this car was a middle finger to compromise. 8. 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1. You'd never guess a Buick could humble a Hemi, but the GSX Stage 1 did exactly that. With its 455 V8 rated at 360 horsepower and a monstrous 510 pound-feet of torque, the most of any American production car at the time, this gentleman's muscle could launch from 0 to 60 in just over 5 seconds. In an era obsessed with raw chaos, the GSX did it with class, chrome, comfort, and quiet menace. It was the muscle car you could take to the country club after dusting a Charger at the lights. It didn't shout, it growled, and that made it terrifying. 7. 1971 Ford Torino Cobra 429 Super Cobra Jet. The Torino Cobra was Ford's street-legal drag weapon, a big, beautiful, blunt instrument built for domination. Beneath its long, angry hood lay the legendary 429 Super Cobra Jet, rated at 375 horsepower, but whispering closer to 450 in reality. Ford equipped it with functional ram air, 3.91 gears, and solid lifter camshafts. It was basically a factory-built race car in Sunday clothes. The Torino wasn't subtle. It was built for quarter-mile bragging rights, and it delivered them in about 13.8 seconds. It was the muscle car equivalent of a heavyweight boxer wearing a tuxedo, all power, no patience. 6. 1970 Plymouth Duster 340. While everyone drooled over Cudas and Roadrunners, the Duster 340 quietly became one of the best pound-for-pound fighters on the street. Its high-winding, small-block 340 made 275 horsepower, but could spin up fast, hitting 6,000 RPM like it meant it. At under 3,200 pounds, the Duster felt nimble, angry, and alive. It didn't need cubic inches to make a statement. With a 4-speed and a set of slicks, these things ran mid-13s, all while looking like an economy coupe your grandma might drive. In the 70s, it wasn't the loudest car that won. It was the smartest. The Duster proved brains could beat brawn. 5. 1971 Chevrolet Nova SS 396. Before the Chevelle and Camaro stole the spotlight, the Nova SS 396 was Chevy's dark horse. It looked like an ordinary commuter car, small, square, unassuming, until you stepped on it. Then, the 375 horsepower big block turned it into a street predator. Running 13.5 seconds in the quarter, it could embarrass heavier, pricier cars without breaking a sweat. The Nova SS was the muscle car equivalent of a bar fight in a suit. Clean on the outside, chaos on the inside. It didn't care about image. It cared about winning. 4. 1970 Mercury Cyclone Spoiler. If you wanted to see Ford at its most unhinged, you didn't go to a Mustang, you went to Mercury. The Cyclone spoiler packed a 429 Cobra Jet rated at 370 horsepower and could hit 60 miles per hour in just over 5 seconds, astonishing for a car the size of a battleship. It had NASCAR in its DNA, aerodynamic lines, competition suspension, and that signature nose cone. Yet despite its power, it vanished into obscurity. Why? Because by 1970, nobody wanted a Mercury. But those who did got one of the wildest machines of the era, a muscle car with the heart of a race car and the soul of a ghost. 3. 1970 Dodge Coronet Super Bee 446 pack. The Super Bee was Dodge's blue-collar warrior. No frills, no nonsense, just brute force. Its 446 pack setup, 3 two-barrel carbs, delivered 390 horsepower and a mountain of torque that could turn asphalt into smoke. What made the Super Bee special wasn't refinement, it was attitude. It was built for guys who couldn't afford a Hemi but wanted to hurt one anyway. With its cartoonish bumblebee graphics and unmistakable whine from those carbs, it became the working man's rocket ship. In the dying light of the muscle era, the Super Bee burned brightest. 2. 1971 Plymouth GTX 440 plus 6. The GTX was called the gentleman's hot rod, but that's underselling it. This car was thunder in a tuxedo. Its 440 plus 6, again that legendary 6-pack setup, made 385 horsepower and a staggering 490 pound-feet of torque. It wasn't a stripped-down racer. It had wood trim, bucket seats, and comfort. but on the street it could crush nearly anything. It wasn't about being the loudest or wildest, it was about dominating quietly. The GTX was proof that muscle didn't need to scream to be dangerous. 1. 1971 Baldwin Motion Camaro Phase 3. This wasn't just a car, it was a statement of defiance. Built by the mad scientists at Baldwin Motion in New York, the Phase 3 Camaro was the ultimate outlaw machine. Each one was custom-built and dyno-tested to deliver at least 500 horsepower from a 454 cubic inch monster. Verified 11-second quarter miles, guaranteed streetability, and a warranty, no factory dared to offer that. In a time when the muscle car was dying, Baldwin Motion was resurrecting it by hand, one beast at a time. These cars were faster than almost anything on the road, and today, they're legends whispered among those who know the real story of American performance. The 1960s were a war zone, not just on the streets of Detroit or the test tracks of Dearborn. This was a decade where horsepower wasn't just measured, it was weaponized. While the world obsessed over handling and heritage, America had one question: can it beat a quarter mile before you blink? And the answer? A parade of brutally beautiful machines that redefined everything we thought a streetcar could be. This isn't a nostalgia trip. This is a deep dive into the loudest, meanest, fastest machines ever to come out of American soil, ranked by one thing only: their quarter-mile time. Let's burn some rubber through history. 10. 1968, Ford Mustang 428 Cobra Jet, 13.56 seconds at 105 miles per hour. Before this, the Mustang was a style icon. With the Cobra Jet, it became a menace. It was born out of frustration. Ford racers were getting crushed by Hemis and 396 Chevelles. Something had to change. Enter Bob Tasca, a Rhode Island dealer who proved that a big engine and a stock Mustang could humble anyone. Ford listened and launched the Cobra Jet quietly, almost sheepishly, at the 1968 NHRA Winter Nationals. The published horsepower was 335. Everyone knew it was a lie. It was actually over 400. This car wasn't about pretty lines or chrome bumpers. It was about lining up next to you, looking unassuming, and leaving you a distant memory at the green light. The Cobra Jet laid down a 13.56-second pass, on bias ply tires, mind you, and instantly flipped the script. It wasn't just a muscle car. It was a statement. 9. 1966, Plymouth Satellite 426 Hemi, 13.48 seconds at 109 miles per hour. It looked like a car your uncle might drive. But open the hood, and you were staring at Chrysler's secret weapon, the 426 Hemi. Nicknamed the Elephant for its sheer size and weight, the Hemi wasn't just a big engine. It was a high-compression, cross-flow head, twin-carb race unit masquerading as a street motor. 425 horsepower, conservatively rated, forged internals, deep-breathing hemispherical heads. It didn't whisper down the strip, it roared, clocking a verified 13.48-second quarter mile. Magazines called it unrefined. Enthusiasts called it unfair. But the drag strip didn't care about opinions. It cared about times. And this boxy, brutal satellite delivered. 8. 1969 Plymouth Roadrunner 426 Hemi, 13.32 seconds at 107 miles per hour. You could buy a Roadrunner with roll-up windows, dog dish hubcaps, and a cartoon horn for under $3,000. But tick the right boxes on the order sheet, and you got something far more sinister. The same Hemi as the Satellite, dropped into a stripped-down shell. This was the democratization of power. Plymouth marketed it as the working man's street racer, but on the strip it was anything but budget. Period tests from Superstock and Drag Illustrated showed it hitting 13.32 at 107 stock. The Roadrunner wasn't about finesse. It was about pure, violent acceleration. In an age of excess, it was a brutal minimalist. Everything you needed and nothing you didn't. 7. 1963 Chevrolet Impala Z11, 13.1 seconds at 112 miles per hour. Imagine showing up to a drag race in a full-size Impala and smoking everyone in sight. That's the Z11, Chevrolet's purpose-built NHRA destroyer. It didn't just have a 427, it had aluminum fenders, a fiberglass hood, and no radio, heater, or sound deadening. It weighed almost 300 pounds less than stock and ran 13.1 seconds all day long. Only 57 were made. Every one of them was sold to a racer. Not a single civilian got one by accident. To drive a Z11 was to enter into a blood pact with the gods of speed. It was elegance by day, executioner by night. 6. 1967 Chevrolet Corvette L88, 12.80 seconds at 111 miles per hour. The L88 was Chevy's worst-kept secret and most dangerous offering. They begged you not to buy it. Literally. It came with warning labels and no creature comforts. But if you knew what you were doing, it was a track killer. The 427 in the L88 was rated at 430 horsepower, but made well over 550 on race fuel. It had aluminum heads, a Holley 850 CFM carb, and a solid lifter cam that sang past 6,500 RPM. Even with stock tires, it hit 12.8 in the quarter. With slicks, much quicker. It didn't care about luxury or comfort. It cared about annihilation. 5. 1964 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt, 11.76 seconds at 122 miles per hour. This was no street car. It was a factory freak. Ford took the Fairlane, deleted everything unnecessary, and shoved in a 427 high-rise dual-quad V8 straight out of NASCAR. They built 100 units, just enough for NHRA homologation. The Thunderbolt was fiberglass, plexiglass, and barely legal. It came with a handwritten warning. Not for street use. Quarter mile? 11.76 seconds at 122 miles per hour. It was the equivalent of dropping a nuclear warhead at a soapbox derby. Magazines like Hot Rod couldn't believe it was real.